Hey guys, tonight we step barefoot onto the warm, sun-baked sands of ancient Rome, right in the belly of the Colosseum. You can feel the grit under your feet, the kind that sticks annoyingly between your toes. The air hums with the weight of anticipation, thick with the scent of roasted meat, sun-warmed stone, and a touch of something musky. Sweat, maybe, or fear. Above you, tiers of shouting faces blur in the distance like a slow-moving tide of toga-clad ghosts. But here, in the center of it all, it's oddly quiet. The crowd's roar fades to a muffled hush, as if the world itself is holding its breath just for you. You're not a spectator tonight. You're a gladiator. And you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, hey, tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is right now in your part of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You squint against the sun, which seems to be actively trying to cook your eyeballs. Your helmet smells like last week's goat stew and has zero ventilation. You've got a sword in one hand and a battered shield in the other, but what you really want is a cold drink and a change of career. The sand is warm under your feet, soothing, almost if you ignore the fact that it's probably soaked in generations of previous employees. You know the image, the bloodthirsty Roman mob, the doomed gladiators hacking away until one of them falls dramatically to their knees, gasping blood pouring from a chest wound. Cue the emperor's thumbs down. But that's just the action movie version. Real gladiators. They didn't always die. In fact, they usually didn't. It's a strange twist, isn't it? The most iconic symbol of Roman violence. Those brutal gladiator matches were more often than not carefully choreographed affairs where the goal wasn't actually death. It was drama, theater, crowd-pleasing grit without the constant need for a mop. You see, gladiators were expensive, like high-end sports car expensive. Training them took time, effort, and a decent amount of lentils. If they died every match, it would be like tossing Ferraris off cliffs for fun. Not great for business. That's the part you don't often hear about. Sure, people came for the spectacle, but death wasn't always on the schedule. Many gladiators fought with skill showmanship and a keen sense of when to fall down dramatically, and many of them lived to fight another day, sometimes even a lot of days. Think of it like pro wrestling, only with more sand and less spandex. As you stand in the arena, the crowd begins to cheer, not because they want you to die, though some definitely do, but because they're hungry for a show. And you're trained to give them one. You can hear the creak of leather armor beside you, the soft crunch of sand as your opponent shifts his weight. There's an almost cozy familiarity to it all, like being backstage before a performance. You're both nervous, you're both professionals, and you both really hope the referee knows what he's doing. Oh, yes, there were referees, but we'll get to that later. For now, just focus on the rhythm of your breath. Inhale, exhale. The crowd blurs again into background noise. You're not here to die. You're here to survive, to entertain, maybe even to win. Of course, that doesn't mean it's safe. Accidents happen. Swords slip. Someone gets a little too into the moment. And even if you make it through this match, there's always the next one, and the one after that. But for now, you raise your sword. The sun glints off the blade, too bright really, and the first clang of metal on metal rings out like a starting bell. You dance across the sand, not because you want to, but because your life literally depends on it. Funny thing, though. As the fight begins, you notice something odd. Your opponent is holding back. Just a little. Enough to be noticeable. Enough to suggest that maybe, just maybe, he doesn't want to kill you either. There's a subtle language to these battles, a hidden choreography. You swing high, he ducks dramatically. He lunges low, and you block with a flair that makes the crowd gasp. Somewhere above you, a vendor yells out something about boiled chickpeas. Someone else sneezes. Life goes on. Historians still argue whether these bouts were truly real or more like bloodsport ballet. Some point to medical reports from the time that mention shattered bones and horrific injuries. Others note that surviving gladiators often fought dozens of times. You don't survive dozens of matches if each one ends in a funeral. It's also worth noting that the crowds weren't always baying for death. In fact, audiences loved a good comeback story. They cheered for favorites, booed the boring ones, and sometimes even shouted down an emperor who seemed too eager for blood. The Roman mob, surprisingly sentimental. There's even evidence, quirky and wonderful, that some gladiators became minor celebrities. People carved graffiti with their names, painted them on walls like teen pop stars. One especially popular guy named Crescens was apparently the net guy. He fought with a net and trident, which is either heroic or deeply inconvenient. But back to you. You feel a sweat dripping down your spine, pooling annoyingly in the small of your back. Your helmet is fogging up, and your opponent just did a weird spin move that might have been cool if it didn't nearly trip him. You both pause, breathing hard. The crowd cheers, misinterpreting your moment of exhaustion as tactical brilliance. You give them a little wave with your sword. Just a flick of the wrist. It's showmanship. And the crowd eats it up. Somewhere deep inside, despite the heat and the nerves and the looming chance of death, you smile. Not big, just a little. Because for a few seconds you forget the danger. You're just a performer basking in the applause, covered in dust, smelling faintly of stew, and still somehow alive. You dodge a clumsy swing and stumble to the side, catching your balance just in time to avoid a mouthful of sand. The crowd cheers again, maybe because they think you pulled off an impressive move, or maybe because they just enjoy watching someone flail. Either way, you're still breathing. And in the gladiator world, that's a solid win. By now, you've probably guessed the twist: gladiators didn't always fight to the death. That blood-soaked stereotype has been dramatically oversold by movies, video games, and that one over-enthusiastic history teacher who liked to shout "Hail Caesar" a bit too often. The truth is these fights were investments. Gladiators were assets, costly ones. And like any smart investor, the person in charge, usually a lanista. The owner of a gladiator school didn't want his prize fighters dying left and right. Imagine running a pizza shop where the oven explodes every week. That's what killing every gladiator would have been like. Dramatic, but not exactly sustainable. So how did this idea of constant death even become a thing? Well, a lot of it comes from later interpretations, writers who were more interested in juicy drama than logistical truth. Plus, let's be real. He fought bravely and then went home for soup. Doesn't exactly sell scrolls. Instead, historians digging through the gritty reality have found records showing that many matches ended with both participants walking, or at least limping away. Sometimes there was a clear winner. Sometimes the crowd decided it was a draw. Sometimes the emperor just shrugged and told them both to take a bow. Even the Roman word gladiator doesn't imply dying. It simply means someone who fights with a gladius, a short sword. There's no built-in expiration date. Just a guy with a weapon and questionable career choices. You wipe your brow with the back of your hand, and your mind drifts to what happens after the match. If you fight well, and more importantly fight entertainingly, you get to rest. Maybe even eat something that isn't barley mush. If you mess up, well, then the Emperor might get involved. Ah, yes, the Emperor. Let's talk about him. He's usually depicted as the ultimate arbiter of death, perched on a throne with a smug little grin thumb poised dramatically in the air. But historians still argue whether that thumb actually meant what we think it did. The idea that thumbs down meant death and thumbs up meant mercy might just be a misunderstanding of Roman gestures. Some sources suggest the reverse. Others think the signal might have been something else entirely, like hiding the thumb inside the fist to mean put the sword away. So the next time you see a dramatic death scene cued by an emperor's thumb, just know that ancient Romans might have been watching that moment and going, "Wait, what does that even mean?" Back in the arena, you circle your opponent, both of you panting. Neither of you looks especially deadly. In fact, he's got a noticeable limp, and you're trying to keep your shield from slipping out of your sweaty grip. It's less epic showdown and more two exhausted guys trying not to cramp. But don't be fooled, these men trained hard. Gladiator schools called ludi were intense. You didn't just swing swords all day. You worked on footwork, balance, crowd work. You learned how to take a hit and make it look theatrical. There were choreographed sparring routines. There were sparring partners called doctores, who corrected your form with barked instructions and occasionally a stick. And after all that, you still might get matched against someone half your size who fights like a caffeinated mongoose, because matches weren't always about fairness. They were about spectacle, variety, sometimes even comedy. One quirky example comes from records of gladiators called andabati fighters who wore helmets with no eye holes. Yep, just blind swinging. It was like watching two armored vacuum cleaners bump into each other. But even those ridiculous matchups often didn't end in death. They ended in laughs, groans, or awkward silences. Then everyone moved on to the next fight. Or the next round of olives and gossip. You swing your sword again wide, this time intentionally missing. Your opponent stumbles backward, flailing just enough to draw a few laughs from the stands. You exchange a look, a flicker of silent agreement. Keep it flashy. Keep it moving. Stay alive. There's an art to this kind of survival. You have to be brave, but not too brave. Skillful, but not threatening to the big-name gladiators with bigger fan bases. You have to shine just enough to be remembered, but not so brightly that someone decides you're getting too expensive to keep. It's a tightrope, and one wrong step could mean a permanent dirt nap. Still, there were moments when death was inevitable. Some fights were to the death, often as punishment for crimes, or to make a particularly big event feel extra spicy, but those were the exception, not the rule. And usually, the people in those matches weren't trained gladiators. They were prisoners, rebels, or unfortunate souls caught up in Rome's love of violent pageantry. You duck under a clumsy strike and feel a breeze as the sword slices the air above you. The crowd cheers again. You can smell roasted onions from a vendor nearby and hear a flute playing something vaguely cheerful in the background. Just another day at the office. For the elite gladiators, the ones with names, reputations, and fan club survival wasn't just likely. It was expected. Because if you were famous, killing you off was a waste. You were a brand, a walking billboard, and Rome loved its stars. Of course, fame came with its own risks. There were rivalries, jealousies, the occasional poisoned soup. But still, better a dramatic rivalry than a one-and-done splatterfest. As your match winds down, you and your opponent slow your movements. The crowd seems satisfied. Someone tosses a laurel wreath onto the sand. You both lower your weapons and nod at each other. Half salute, half thank you for not stabbing me today. You step back, blinking against the sun. Your limbs ache, Your throat is dry and your heart still pounds, but you're alive. That's what counts. Later, as you sit in the shade drinking watered wine, you'll replay every move in your head. Wonder if the crowd liked you. Wonder if the lanista noticed. Wonder if your next match will be easier, harder, or involve a guy with a bear. But for now, you're still standing. You fought well. And like so many of your fellow gladiators, you didn't die. You'll sleep tonight on straw, probably, with sore muscles and sand still in your ears, but you'll sleep knowing you made it again. You wake to the rustle of straw and the low murmur of voices nearby. Morning has slipped in quietly, warming the air with that kind of heavy Roman heat that already promises to bake the day. Your shoulder is stiff from yesterday's fight, nothing serious, just the kind of soreness that feels almost like a badge. You're still here, still breathing, and today is another day in the life of a gladiator. Funny thing is, you weren't always meant for this life. Very few people are born thinking, "Ah, yes, the Colosseum, that's where I'll make my mark." In fact, how you end up in this sand-slick world is a story all its own. It starts in places as varied as smoky taverns, dusty battlefields, quiet villages, and even cramped Roman courtrooms. Some gladiators, as you might expect, were enslaved captives from conquered lands. After Rome steamrolled your village, they'd haul you off, slap a label on your back, and decide whether you were worth selling as a house servant, a laborer, or if you looked fit and fighty, a potential star in the arena. You didn't get a say. One day you're herding goats, the next you're learning how to parry a trident. Others were criminals, and not just hardened assassins or serial stabbers. Nope. Sometimes it was petty theft or political rebellion. Rome had a habit of turning punishment into performance, and forcing someone into the arena made for a pretty theatrical form of justice. The crowds didn't always know or care what crime you'd committed, only that you were now part of the bloody entertainment lineup. But here's the twist. Some people chose this life, voluntarily, with full knowledge of what it entailed. They were called octorati, free men, who signed up to become gladiators. Yes, signed up, as in willingly walked into the ludus. Training school took an oath and agreed to live under strict rules in exchange for food, fame, and a paycheck. Well, a very modest paycheck, but still. Why would anyone do this? Good question. And Rome, as usual, has a few weird answers. Some of them were deeply in debt. Rome wasn't exactly a utopia of social mobility. If you owed money and had no way to pay it back, the arena offered a way out. You'd hand over your freedom for a few years, train fight, hopefully not die, and maybe, just maybe, walk away with your debts cleared and a small pile of coins. Others were thrill seekers, people drawn to danger and spectacle. The same kind of person who might skydive today or try to pet a crocodile for fun. To them, gladiating was glory. It was a shot at becoming a legend, or at least getting their face etched into some tavern wall. There were also those with nowhere else to go. Disgraced soldiers, broken men, outsiders looking for a place to belong. Gladiator schools might have been harsh, but they offered structure, purpose, meals that didn't involve stealing from temple leftovers. The process of joining was surprisingly formal. You'd sign a contract, take an oath, sacramentum gladiatorium. It basically said you agreed to endure being beaten, burned, chained, and killed if necessary. A real feel-good slogan. But once the ink or blood in some cases dried, you became part of the gladiator family. And that family was diverse. Gladiators came from across the Roman world: Africa, Gaul, Britannia, Greece, Syria. You'd hear a dozen languages in the dormitories, eat meals beside someone who once marched under Caesar, and someone else who herded sheep in the Pyrenees. It was a strange melting pot of muscle grit and questionable hygiene. Inside, the ludus daily life was rigid. You were owned by the lanista, trained by instructors, and governed by routines that made modern boot camps look like yoga retreats. Discipline was constant. Defiance got you shackled, or worse demoted, to a less glamorous fighting class. You didn't want to be the guy fighting with a club and no armor. Those guys were basically padding for the real stars. Still, for all its brutality, life in the ludus had moments of strange normalcy. You had roommates, chores, gossip, friendships, rivalries, card games made with scratched bits of pottery. Some gladiators even formed tight bonds with their trainers, especially if they were doing well in their matches. A popular fighter was valuable, and valuable things were protected at least a little. Historians still argue whether octorati were treated better than enslaved fighters. Some say yes, they were seen as professionals, not property. Others point out that once you took the oath, your status dropped fast. You lived under the same roof, ate the same lentil mush, bled on the same sand, but at least you got a name. A stage name, actually, like a Roman pro-wrestler persona. Maybe something fearsome like Decimator or Felix the Cruel, or something slightly confusing like Cupido. Yes, that's right. A real gladiator was once named after the god of love. Not exactly intimidating, unless your opponent had severe commitment issues. Your name mattered. It became your identity in the arena. Fans would chant it, carve it on walls, even scribble it on pottery shards as a kind of ancient merch. Some gladiators were famous across cities. Their faces appeared in frescoes, their victories recited in taverns. A few even got portraits commissioned, which is about as close to an ancient Roman selfie as it gets. For some octorati, the plan was simple. Win a few matches, collect the cash, and buy their freedom back. It happened more than you'd think. Gladiators could be awarded a rudis, a wooden sword symbolizing retirement and liberty. If the emperor or the crowd liked you enough, they'd grant it. You'd walk out a free man. Scarred, yes, but also respected. Others never left. Some because they died. Some because they grew addicted to the crowd's roar. And some because they had nothing waiting for them on the outside. The ludus, as harsh as it was, gave them a place in the world. You rise from your straw mattress and stretch your arms. Another day begins. Somewhere nearby, a water basin splashes. You hear the thud of wooden practice swords. A dog barks. The scent of warm bread wafts in from a nearby kitchen. You're not a criminal. You're not a slave. You chose this. And for all its madness, there's something strangely satisfying about it. You tie your belt, run a hand through your unwashed hair, and grab your gear. Outside, the sun has already begun to climb, throwing long shadows across the courtyard. It's time to train, to prepare, to keep your name alive another day longer. Because here, every choice, every move, every drop of sweat, it all counts. And you're just getting started. The morning drills start like they always do, with the heavy stomp of sandaled feet and the rough bark of your doctor, the head trainer, whose voice can strip paint off marble. You join the line of groggy, half-awake gladiators, all of you bleary-eyed and blinking against the harsh Roman sun. Someone coughs behind you, and another guy is muttering what might be a prayer or a curse under his breath. Either way, it sounds about right for this hour. The courtyard where you train is a flat square of packed earth and sand edged with wooden dummies, straw targets, and the occasional amphora someone forgot to put away. The walls of the ludus, the gladiator school, rise around you like a fortress dotted with balconies, where guards and trainers can watch everything from a safe, smug distance. You stretch your arms, roll your shoulders, and wince at a bruise you forgot you had. Another normal day at the office. Contrary to the bloody chaos you might imagine, life as a gladiator outside the arena was surprisingly regimented. In fact, it often resembled something halfway between a military camp and a wellness retreat. Weird combo, right? But when your property worth more than most people's houses, your owner wants you in peak condition. Not just muscled up, but limber, well-fed, and ideally not dead from infection. So first up, stretching. Lots of it. You limber up under the gaze of your trainers practicing rolls and balance exercises that look suspiciously like yoga poses with a lot more grunting. Your arms and legs move like they remember the rhythm before your brain does falling into well-worn patterns of warm-ups and sparring stances. The sand beneath your feet is hot now, pleasantly so, like a heated floor. Then come the wooden swords. Rudists practice weapons heavier than the real thing. The idea is that if you train with something that feels like swinging a sack of bricks, the actual arena sword will feel light as a feather, which of course it doesn't. But it's a nice theory. You pair off with another fighter, Callistus, the tall guy from Gaul who smells permanently of onions. He gives you a nod, then lunges. You parry without thinking, muscle memory doing all the work. Wood thuds against wood. The two of you trade blows in a slow, practiced rhythm, more like a deadly waltz than an actual fight. Between rounds, the doctoré stomps around, shouting critiques and corrections. Keep your shield up. Don't lean forward like you're trying to kiss the sand. And that last one might have been for you. Then it's on to the footwork drills. Circles, side steps, short bursts of sprinting with full armor. Your legs burn, your arms ache, and your stomach grumbles for second breakfast. Welcome to the daily grind of gladiator life. And yet, it's not all pain and punishment. Because after training comes what you might call the spa portion of the day. No, seriously, you and the others head inside, sweat-drenched and sand-covered, toward the Thermi, the bath complex attached to the ludus. It's one of the few luxuries you actually get. You strip off your gear with the exhausted groans of men who've just done more lunges than is medically advisable. Then, step into the tepidarium, the warm room. The air inside smells of olive oil and damp tile. You inhale deeply, and for the first time all morning, your shoulders relax. The heat seeps into your bones. You sit on a stone bench, lean back, and let your eyes drift half closed. Around you, steam swirls. Conversations are low and lazy bits of gossip, teasing occasional reflections on strategy, or the odd philosophical question like, if your opponent drops his sword, should you wait for him to pick it up, or just kick him in the knee? After a while, you dip into the caldarium, the hot bath, and then the frigidarium, the cold plunge. It's shock therapy in its purest form. 1 second you're melting like beeswax, the next you're gasping like a fish on the deck of a galley, but it does wonders for the soreness. Probably. Next comes food. You head to the mess hall, which smells of barley stew and roasted garlic. The standard gladiator diet is shockingly nutritious, high in carbs, low in meat, designed to keep you bulky and resilient. Historians even nicknamed it the barley diet. You eat lentils, beans, oatmeal, dried fruit, and the occasional scrap of meat when someone important is watching. Oh, and there's a curious little twist ash. Yes, charcoal ash was sometimes mixed into drinks or food as a form of primitive calcium supplement. It gave your bones a bit more oomph, or so the Romans believed. So if your morning porridge has a faintly smoky aftertaste, now you know why. You sit beside a few familiar faces. A Germanic guy with a tattoo of a bear, a wiry Egyptian who never stops humming, and an older Thracian who tells endless stories that may or may not be true. They're your tribe now, fellow survivors. You share food insults and laughter. Occasionally, someone gets up and demonstrates a new technique with a chicken bone. It's oddly comforting. Between meals and evening drills, there's downtime. Some guys nap, others gamble with scratched tiles. A few write letters or dictate them to scribes if they're lucky enough to be literate. And some sneak off to the edge of the courtyard to meet with admirers because, yes, even sweaty gladiators have groupies. You've seen the graffiti on the outside walls. Crescens is the delight of all the girls, or Colitis, the Thracian, makes the girls sigh. Ancient fan service. You wouldn't be surprised if someone was already sketching a crude portrait of you on their chamber pot. But not all of it is glamorous. Training injuries are common. Sprained wrists, cracked ribs, the occasional snapped tendon. There's a guy named Lucius who once tripped during footwork drills and head-butted a statue. Still has the dent. And sometimes people don't come back from training. Accidents, heart failure, a particularly bad fall during a spar. You nod solemnly when the trainers carry someone away, and by evening the others fill the silence with extra jokes or quieter footsteps. Historians still debate how brutal this daily life really was. Some believe it resembled modern athletic training, a harsh but manageable routine. Others argue it was closer to imprisonment with a few perks. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. But for now, as you wrap your bruised wrist and pick a bit of ash out of your barley, it's just your life. As the sun begins to dip below the Roman skyline, casting long golden shadows across the ludus walls, you gather with the others in the courtyard. One last round of drills, one last reminder from your trainer. In the arena, they cheer for the clever, not the reckless. You nod, muscles aching, but mind steady. Another day down, another day stronger. You head toward your straw bed, the air cooler, now the sky softening into dusk. Tomorrow, the sand awaits again. But tonight, you rest, in the heart of the most brutal empire on Earth. There's a strange peace in routine. Even before the sun rises, you can feel it pressing against the stone walls of the ludus, warming them like bread left too long in the oven. Somewhere nearby, someone's sharpening a blade with slow, deliberate strokes that rasp like insects on bone. You tie the leather straps of your greaves, take a last sip of watered wine, and prepare yourself not for death, not exactly, but for another match. But here's the part most people don't understand. Not all gladiator fights were the same. In fact, very few looked like the all-out death duels Hollywood's made you expect. Some were fast and flashy. Some were carefully orchestrated. Others, kind of like watching two tired cats swat at each other while trying not to fall asleep. When the arena gates open and you step into the sand again, you're not always fighting to kill or be killed. Sometimes you're just trying to make it through a bout without vomiting from nerves. The match might be a missio, which means it's winnable without blood. It might be part of a series, a tournament-style event. You might even be facing a friend or a regular sparring partner, which complicates things because how do you sell a convincing fight without accidentally breaking someone's face? The Roman games were layered affairs with match after match of varying intensity. Think of them as a kind of blood-soaked playlist. You'd start the day with opening acts, less trained fighters, comic duels or executions of criminals, and gradually build up to the main events where skilled gladiators brought the crowd to its feet. Some matches were mismatched on purpose, designed to highlight one fighter's dominance. Others paired gladiators of similar size and reputation, turning the sand into a chessboard of movement and strategy. Some fights were part of storylines, reenactments of mythological battles, or famous military victories. There were even fights against wild animals, though most gladiators weren't thrilled about facing something that considered them an hors d'oeuvre. You squint toward your opponent today, a compact spring-loaded guy in a wide helmet and carrying a trident. He's a retiarius, one of the more theatrical types. Armed with a net and trident, the retiarius looks like someone who missed his fishing boat and decided to pick a fight instead. You meanwhile are in heavier armor with a broad shield, a classic matchup. This isn't just a test of strength, it's a clash of styles. Speed versus endurance, net versus sword. And the crowd loves it. But here's the secret: you've faced him before. You know he favors his left leg, that he always throws the net high, and that his trident thrusts are flashier than they are dangerous. You also know he's nursing a shoulder strain from yesterday's drills. He's good, but today you might be better. You circle each other in the arena, the crowd already murmuring. It's a decent turnout. Senators, merchants, street vendors, and the occasional drunk guy yelling helpful advice like, "Hit him again, even though you haven't hit him the first time." Your feet shift in the sand muscles, tuned like a harp string. And then, there it is, the first move. The net flies glinting in the sun like a silver cobweb. You duck under it, pivot, and tap your blade against his shoulder. Not a killing blow, just a signal. "I could've." He grins behind his helmet. The crowd cheers. That's the dance. Not always blood, sometimes just the illusion of danger. Historians still argue how often these matches were worked, prearranged to be more performance than fight. Some say the best bouts had a sense of flow, a kind of mutual understanding. Others insist that even when the goal wasn't death, the bruises were still real. And, honestly, you felt those bruises. They linger, like a badly told joke that keeps echoing in your ribs. You press forward again. This time, the trident grazes your arm not deep just enough to make you wince. The crowd sees the hit and roars. You stumble back, dramatically fall to one knee, and raise your shield just as he charges. Sand sprays into the air. A bird overhead cries out. Somewhere in the crowd, someone drops a wine cup. Then it's over. Not with a scream or a final lunge, but with the referee stepping between you, palm raised. He looks at both of you, then to the editor, the sponsor of today's games, sitting under a shaded canopy with a wreath on his head and too many rings on his fingers. The editor gives a lazy nod. It's a draw. You're both spared. The crowd claps, some in approval, some in disappointment. You stand slowly, extend a hand to the retiarius and help him up. Another day survived, another show delivered. Not every fight gets this tidy ending. Some do end with death, especially when the crowd demands it, or when a fighter refuses to surrender. But often, especially in well-matched bouts, survival is not just possible, it's preferred. A skilled gladiator who knows how to play to the crowd is worth far more alive than dead. There's even a record of a match between two gladiators, Verus and Priscus, where both men fought so brilliantly that the Emperor Titus awarded them freedom at the same time. That's like both Super Bowl teams winning and going home with matching trophies. Unheard of. But in Rome, if you were good enough, anything could happen. Back in the barracks, you peel off your gear and sink onto your bench with a grunt. Your arm stings a little, but it's nothing a smear of honey salve won't fix. You drink from a clay cup, wipe sweat from your brow, and glance at the sun inching down the sky. Another fight behind you. And this one, not even a scratch worth bragging about. Some of the younger guys gather around, asking questions. Did you see that net throw? What was with that fake stumble? You shrug and give them a half smile. Sometimes the best move is the one they didn't see. That's the real skill, knowing when to fight, when to dodge, and when to sell it just right. It's a delicate balance of showmanship instinct and sheer survival. And tomorrow could be another match, could be a rest day, could be you standing in that sand again, facing a stranger with wild eyes and a sword twice the size of yours. But that's tomorrow's problem. For now, you've done what you needed to do, fought without falling, entertained without dying. And in this world, that's the closest thing to a win you'll ever get. Later that evening, the hum of conversation floats through the halls of the Ludus like low music. Someone is softly whistling. A few others are tending wounds in the flickering light of oil lamps. Your arm is wrapped now, the sting of the trident scratch fading into a dull throb. You've eaten your barley stew, had your fill of dried figs, and now you sit back on a worn bench, tired but alive, your favorite combination. A group gathers in the corner, half listening to a heated discussion between two fighters arguing about a call in a previous match. The crowd was cheering. The moment was fast, but apparently someone swears that a blow should have counted. And that brings us to one of the more surprising facts about gladiator games. They had referees. Yes, honest-to-goodness referees. Like in soccer. Only these ones wore tunics, carried long sticks instead of whistles, and occasionally had to make split-second decisions about whether you'd just lost your arm or simply dislocated it stylishly. They were called summa rudis and secunda, rudis chief and assistant referees. Their job was to oversee the bout, make sure the rules were followed. Yes, there were rules, and prevent unfair play. They'd even pause the match if one fighter lost his weapon, allowing him to pick it up before the action resumed. Honestly, it's more civilized than some modern sports. You remember one match a few weeks ago. Two young fighters, both new. One of them got a solid hit in, clearly landed a blade on the other's shoulder. The Rudies stepped in, called for a pause, and reset their positions like two overly violent chess pieces. The crowd booed. One of the fighters spat in the sand. But the match continued, and in the end, both walked away. Bruised but breathing. Referees weren't just rule enforcers, they were often retired gladiators themselves. They knew the rhythm of a fight, the trick of a fake-out, faint the telltale signs of a real injury, versus a dramatic flop. And sometimes they knew how to turn a blind eye at just the right moment. Because, let's face it, not all calls were pure. This is Rome, after all, and Rome adored a little bit of chaos in its order. There were also scorekeepers and officials sitting near the editor taking notes on outcomes, match quality, and fighter performance. If you made the games look good, you went up in reputation. If you got too sloppy or too violent, you could find yourself fighting less popular time slots, or worse, accidentally scheduled for a match against someone twice your size and half your mercy. And while there weren't literal scorecards like in a Vegas boxing match, fighters were evaluated. Word got around. A good performance, even in a loss, could raise your profile. A bad one might leave you buried in sand with little more than a few confused cheers echoing in your memory. Still, even the best referees couldn't prevent everything. There were cheaters. Oh, yes. Gladiators who sharpened their swords beyond the regulation point, who smuggled in lucky charms, or cursed ones who bribed assistants to accidentally loosen an opponent's helmet strap. There was one notorious case of a fighter who rubbed animal fat on his opponent's shield before a match made it nearly impossible to grip. You once saw a guy feign a leg injury just to bait his opponent into a false move. Worked like a charm until the referee saw the trick and reversed the decision mid-match. The crowd loved it, drama and justice in one sunny spectacle. But the fighter who got caught, not so lucky. He ended up spending a week cleaning latrines with a toothbrush made of straw. Whether or not that's medically effective is still up for debate. But cheating wasn't always so overt. Sometimes it came from higher up the editors, or even the emperor. If they had a favorite fighter, someone they bet money on, or had just added to their personal fan-favorite list, let's just say the referee's stick might wag in a suspiciously biased direction. Historians still argue over how often the outcomes were rigged. Some matches definitely had an edge of unpredictability, while others seemed a little too convenient. Imagine watching two fighters circle each other for 10 minutes, land a few light taps, and then suddenly the favorite collapses dramatically, and the underdog gets a standing ovation. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe someone got paid. Still, there's a weird sort of comfort in the chaos. Everyone knew the rules were bendable. The trick was surviving long enough to benefit from the system yourself. A few favors here, a few deals there. And before you know it, you're getting better matches, cleaner armor, and the occasional piece of fresh fruit in your rations. You stretch your legs and wander toward the small shrine tucked into a corner of the training hall. It's simple. Just a stone altar, a few offerings, and a statue of Nemesis, the goddess of balance and vengeance. A lot of gladiators leave little tokens here. Beads, coins, bits of cloth. You drop a pebble, smooth as glass, found in the arena sand. A small thing, but symbolic. Because at the end of the day, you're not just fighting for glory. You're fighting to stay relevant, to stay remembered. And if a referee can help you do that even by turning a blind eye once in a while, you're not above thanking the gods for it. Behind you, the laughter rises again. Someone's retelling a story about a match where a referee got knocked down mid-fight and had to crawl out of the way while two sweaty giants kept swinging like nothing happened. Apparently, he got a broken nose and a fan club. Romans love that sort of thing, people who suffer for the spectacle. You head back to your bunk, rubbing your temples. Your eyes are heavy. Tomorrow, you'll spar again. You'll sweat through drills, eat your ash-flavored lentils, and maybe, just maybe, you'll have another match. If you're lucky, the referee will remember your name. If you're really lucky, he'll like you enough to make sure your fights stay fair, or at least entertaining. Because in this world where every match is half survival and half show, it's not just strength that saves you. It's knowing how to play the game. You wake up, groggy, sand still clinging to your skin in places you didn't know sand could reach. The morning light seeps through the wooden slats above your bunk, casting stripes across your face. Your arm itches under the bandage. Nothing serious, just a souvenir from yesterday's match with the Retiarius. You stretch yawn, and try not to think too hard about whether today might involve dodging another net. But even if it does, you remind yourself you have a secret weapon, understanding the rules of the show. And one of the biggest rules, possibly the most famous of all, has been wildly misunderstood by history buffs and movie directors alike. You know the one. It involves the emperor, a dramatic gesture, and the fate of a tired, bleeding gladiator. Yep, we're talking about the thumbs. You've seen the scene, the victorious gladiator standing over his fallen foe. Sweat, glistening chest heaving. The crowd roars. The emperor rises slowly, arm extended, thumb turned which way again. And what does it actually mean? The truth, it's messier than you think. Modern pop culture has trained us to believe that a thumbs down meant death, while a thumbs up meant mercy. But historians still argue whether that's accurate. Some even say we might have the whole thing completely backwards. Roman writers from the time use phrases like pollice verso, literally with a turned thumb, but they don't say which direction. Was it turned up to mean kill him, or down, or maybe hidden altogether? One theory says a closed fist with the thumb tucked inside was the real sign for mercy. That gesture meant put away the sword. It was subtle, almost gentle, a signal that said no need for blood today. On the flip side, an extended thumb pointing up sideways or even stabbing down was interpreted as the motion of a blade, a symbolic execution. Go ahead, finish it. So if you've been picturing Roman emperors giving the Roman equivalent of a Facebook dislike to condemn someone, you might have been misled by a few centuries of theater. And let's be honest, thumbs down for death just feels more dramatic, doesn't it? But back in the arena, gestures weren't always standardized. Different editors, different crowds, different expectations. Sometimes the decision wasn't even about the thumb. It was about the noise. The roar of approval or the hiss of disapproval told the editor what the people wanted. The emperor just went with the vibe. You remember one match, clearly two fighters, both veterans. One of them, a guy called Aetius, took a nasty fall. He landed badly, weapon flying from his hand, his arm bent at a painful angle. The other fighter raised his sword, paused, and looked toward the editor. The crowd hesitated. Some shouted, some clapped. Others waved their hands in confusing directions. Eventually, the editor gave a flick of his wrist. Just a flick, barely a movement. And that was it. Aetius was spared. Not because the rules said so, but because the crowd didn't want to lose a favorite. That's the real game behind the games. It's not just about skill, it's about perception. The crowd doesn't want fairness. They want a story. A hero, a villain, a plot twist. And if that means bending tradition or improvising a few symbolic gestures, so be it. Some gladiators knew how to milk the moment. They'd raise a pleading hand just slowly enough to catch the sunlight. They'd fall in a graceful sprawl instead of a clumsy heap. One guy even learned how to fake a fainting spell so convincingly, the crowd would beg for his life out of sheer sympathy. He lived long enough to retire, probably still pretending to faint at dinner parties. You practice those gestures too. Maybe you won't need them. Maybe you'll win clean. But it's good to know how to play the theater. The moment of mercy or doom might come down to your performance, not your blade. And sometimes even a strong crowd reaction can't save you if the editor's having a bad day, or if he lost a bet on you last week, or if he's trying to impress someone by looking especially ruthless. It's not science, it's pageantry, politics, popularity. There's a story about Emperor Caligula, never one to pass up a good tantrum, who once had a gladiator executed just because he sneezed at the wrong time. Probably exaggerated, but it captures the mood. Sometimes your fate turns on a coin, a mood swing, or a misplaced sneeze. That's why you keep your movements clean and your posture proud, even when you're losing, especially then. The moment you look pitiful, you're less of a show and more of a problem to be cleaned up. But if you fall with dignity, bleed with style, or smile at the crowd through a busted lip, they might cheer loud enough to save you. Because in the arena, perception is protection. You lie back on your bunk now, hands behind your head, thinking through the different gestures you've seen. Not just from the emperor or the referees, but from the crowd. The waving of handkerchiefs, the stamping of feet, the rhythmic clapping. When a match really gets exciting, there's a kind of silent language in the arena. You learn to read it like a musician reads a score. The crowd is your orchestra, your mirror, your potential savior. Win them over, and you might earn not just mercy, but memory. A name painted on a wall. A voice shouted in the streets. You sit up again and glance toward the small mirror polished from bronze hanging on the opposite wall. Your face looks older than it did a month ago. Not old, just worn. Sand, sweat, and time will do that. But your eyes are still sharp. Your body still strong. Tomorrow might be another fight. And if the worst happens if you fall, you've already practiced the move. The outstretched arm, the pleading look, the dignified silence. Maybe the editor will flick his hand. Maybe the crowd will chant. Maybe someone will remember your name, even if your fate is sealed by a thumb pointed whichever way history can't quite agree on. But tonight, you sleep. Not in fear, in preparation. Because out there, in the heart of the Colosseum, everything matters. How you fight, how you fall, and sometimes how well you understand the mystery of a single thumb. You lean back against the worn stone wall of the ludus, a chunk of bread in one hand, and a bruised apple in the other, watching the courtyard slowly fill with fighters. It's a rest day. No drills, no matches. Just time to recover gossip, and maybe rewrap that one toe you're sure is broken but haven't quite admitted to yet. Across from you, a young murmillo is sketching something into a piece of tile with a shard of bone. You squint. It's a face, maybe his, maybe someone else's. He's not much of an artist, but you can tell it's a gladiator. Helmet, shield, and a slightly exaggerated set of biceps. The others gather to see. They laugh, nudge him, and someone jokingly asks if he's taking commissions. Because here's something that might surprise you: gladiators weren't just anonymous meat for the Colosseum grinder. The popular ones, they were celebrities, walking, sweating, bleeding endorsements. And while you won't find them on TikTok, you would find them scribbled all over the Roman Empire in graffiti and mosaics, even in the odd souvenir cup. You, for example, might not be famous yet, but some of your stablemates are. There's Lupercus, whose name has appeared on at least 3 bathhouse walls, and Vibius, who got a stylized mural painted near the marketplace after a particularly flashy win. You've seen it. He looks heroic in a vaguely confused way, like someone told him to strike a dramatic pose, but forgot to explain why. The Romans loved their champions. They cheered for them, bet on them, gossiped about them. They painted their names with phrases like, "Crescens is the delight of the girls," or "Spiculus, conqueror of many." And yes, those were real. People wrote love notes, too, sometimes next to stylized doodles of gladiators holding hearts or being fed grapes by admirers. Some gladiators even had fan clubs. Literal fan clubs, groups of citizens who followed their matches, sent gifts, and pooled money to help free them. They might carve your likeness into a lamp. They might start rumors about your romantic escapades. They might shout your name loud enough to sway the editor's decision if you ever found yourself flat on the sand. That's why some fighters played to the crowd like seasoned performers. A perfectly timed helmet, toss a dramatic bow, even a mid-fight wink, those things built a following. And a following meant influence. The more popular you were, the more likely you were to be spared, to be scheduled for marquee matches, to be fed something better than soggy lentils for once. Historians still debate how far this popularity extended. Did gladiators really have merchandise? Probably not in the way we think of it today. There were no action figures or lunchboxes, but there were oil lamps, shaped like helmets, goblets with etched names and decorative plaques featuring fighters mid-strike. Were those commissioned by fans made by the ludus to advertise its talent? A bit of both, maybe. You once heard of a gladiator whose image was painted on a tavern wall next to a plate of oysters. The message, "Come eat like Marcus fights fast, salty, and a little dangerous." That's branding. And the merchandise wasn't just for the living. Some freed gladiators paid to have their victories immortalized in mosaics or tombstones. Here lies Felix Victor of 17 matches, champion of the people. That's a legacy. One set in stone, literally. You look around the courtyard and wonder which of these men will be remembered. The burly guy with the crooked nose and a habit of breaking swords, the wiry Greek who trains like he's got something to prove. Or maybe even you. Stranger things have happened. The most famous gladiators often got favors from high places. Emperor Nero was said to have a favorite named Spiculus, whom he lavished with gifts, houses, money, possibly even an estate. That's like getting a personal shout-out from your head of state, and a villa to go with it. But fame came with risks too. The higher your profile, the more pressure to perform, and the more dangerous your opponents became. If you were a crowd favorite, people wanted to see you win, but only after a good scare. No one likes a perfect record. Too boring. Plus, jealousy ran hot in the ludus. Not everyone loved the guy with his name carved on amphorae and his face painted in bathhouses. Some quietly rooted for him to trip in training or slip on his own ego in the middle of a match. Still, being famous gave you options. More food, more influence, a chance at freedom even. A few gladiators made enough money or won enough favor to buy their way out and retire with full honors. Some even became trainers, passing on their skills to the next generation of hopefuls. Others just vanished, probably sipping wine in the countryside and telling exaggerated stories to wide-eyed locals. Of course, not every popular gladiator was a noble warrior. Some leaned into the villain role. They strutted into the arena like villains from a play, sneering at the crowd, spitting on the sand. And it worked. People loved to hate them. You don't have to be liked to be remembered. You just have to be unforgettable. As the sun climbs higher, a pair of young trainees walk past giggling. One of them has a drawing scrawled in charcoal on his arm. It looks like a helmeted figure, and the letters of your name, more or less. You smirk. Not much, just enough to acknowledge it. It's a start. Later, as you lie back and rest, you think about the strange position you're in. Not a free citizen, not entirely a slave, somewhere in between. A performer, a warrior, a human billboard, and maybe, just maybe a star in the making. Because in ancient Rome, fame was as sharp as any sword. It could lift you up. It could protect you. Or it could turn on you in a heartbeat. But if you played it right, if you gave the people what they wanted, you might earn more than just survival. You might earn a place in history. The sun hasn't quite climbed past the rooftops when you're summoned to the armory. You half expect another surprise match or maybe a new piece of gear. But today, it's something else entirely. Today, you're being fitted for a different kind of fight. You've been selected to perform as a specialty fighter, one of the exotic classes of gladiators, designed to add flair, confusion, and a touch of absurdity to the spectacle. No longer just a murmillo with his heavy shield and short sword. Today, you're being asked to try something a little weirder. The quartermaster hands you a net. A real net. You blink at him. Retiarius, he grunts. Catch practice at noon. And just like that, your world tilts sideways. Gladiator combat was never one size fits all. The Romans loved variety. They built matchups like drama producers opposing strengths, conflicting styles, and the occasional totally bonkers pairing that made no military sense, but looked excellent from the cheap seats. That's why there were different gladiator classes, each with their own armor, weapons, and flavor of chaos. The Retiarius, your assignment today, is one of the strangest. Light armor, a weighted net, a three-pronged trident, and a dagger as backup. No helmet, no shield. Just you, your fishing tools, and a lot of prayer. Originally mocked as effeminate by Roman elites mostly because of the lack of helmet, the Retiarius turned out to be surprisingly effective. Fast, agile, and annoying as sand in your sandals, they darted around slower, heavily armored opponents, like mosquitoes around an ox. In the hands of someone clever, that net could snag a shield, tangle legs, or yank a weapon right out of someone's grip. Your first practice toss lands on a nearby instructor. Not in a good way. He glares at you. Try not to catch yourself next time. You nod sheepishly and pull the net back. It's harder than it looks. It tangles, it snags. It catches the wind and flips over like a disobedient bedsheet. But after a dozen throws and some creative cursing, you start to get the feel for it. It's less about brute force and more about timing, flow, and footwork. Like dancing with a spider web. The trident's a different story. Long, awkward, top-heavy. You practice jabs into a straw dummy, imagining it has the smug face of your last opponent. It's satisfying when the prongs dig in deep. Less satisfying when the handle catches on your belt and nearly clocks you in the chin. Over in the corner, someone's dressing as a secutor, the usual pairing for a Retiarius. He's got a smooth, rounded helmet with tiny eye holes designed specifically to counter net attacks. No plumes, no crests, just a blank curved dome like an angry thumbtack. He's got a short sword and a rectangular shield, fast enough to keep up with you, strong enough to squash you if you get too clever. This is where the spectacle really shines. These matchups weren't fair. They were entertaining. you, the light-footed fisherman, with your weird weapons against the armored bulldozer. You were meant to dart, frustrate, surprise. He was meant to stomp, block, and crush. It was a game of cat and mouse, except the mouse had a fork and a laundry net. There were other specialty fighters, too. Ever hear of the Dimmacharis dual swords? No shield, just 2 blades and enough confidence to terrify a centurion. Or the Hoplomachus, a flashy type with a spear, a small round shield, and armor styled after Greek warriors. More show than substance sometimes, but it looked incredible, from 20 rows up. And let's not forget the Andabatai, perhaps the most ridiculous of all. They fought blind. Blind. Their helmets had no eye holes. Just imagine 2 human moles swinging wildly, guided only by sound and prayer. Historians still argue whether they were a real fighting class or just a gag act. Either way, you hope that assignment never lands in your lap. Some say these exotic matchups were inspired by Rome's obsession with storytelling. A fight between a retiarius and a secutor. That wasn't just combat, it was a metaphor. Man versus nature. Agility versus brute strength. Cleverness versus tradition. And the crowd loved it. The trick was making it look good. No one wanted a fast, clumsy defeat. They wanted tension, daring escapes, reversals, a net toss just barely dodged, a trident clashing dramatically against a shield, a sudden, desperate lunge that turns the tide of battle. That's what sold the scene. You remember seeing one of those specialty matchups a few weeks ago, a Thraex, Thracian-style fighter with a curved blade facing a towering Murmillo. The Thraex danced around him like fire, dodging and darting landing strikes on the arms and legs. It took 15 minutes before the Murmillo cornered him. The crowd was on its feet the entire time. Of course, not every specialty class was effective. Some were walking cautionary tales. You once met a guy assigned as a Lachearius, another net fighter, but with a lasso instead of a trident. Yes, a literal rope noose, like a Roman cowboy. He spent most of his match tangled in his own weapon, and the crowd nearly died from laughter. He wasn't invited back. Back in the present, you practice another toss. This time, the net lands cleanly on the dummy's shoulder. You follow with a jab of the trident light controlled. The trainer grunts in approval. Progress. Later, during lunch, a few of your comrades eye your new gear with curiosity. Net, huh? One says mouthful of dates. Better you than me. Another raises his cup. To the fishman. May your trident find flesh and not your own foot. You nod, smiling. It's ridiculous. It's risky. But it's also your next shot at standing out. You don't have the bulk of a secutor, the flash of a Dimmacharis, or the cult following of a veteran Murmillo. But this you can turn into a show. Because every fight is a performance. And the more unusual your tools, the more likely people are to remember your name. Maybe even paint it on a wall. That night, as you oil the net and check the trident for balance, you feel something unexpected. Excitement. The sand awaits. The crowd waits. And somewhere out there a secutor is preparing to chase a net-wielding lunatic across the Colosseum floor. Let's hope he's not faster than he looks. You wake to the soft creak of wooden beams and the faint smell of burning oil. It's still too early for drills too late to roll over and pretend it's not happening. You sit up slowly, rubbing your eyes, your muscles reminding you of yesterday's trident practice. Another day, another aching shoulder. The net lies coiled beside your bed like a sleeping snake. But today isn't about you. As you make your way to the courtyard, you notice something different. A small group has gathered at the far edge, clustered around someone who's warming up with slow, deliberate movements. She's armored, focused, and clearly not one of the regulars. Today, the Ludus is hosting a female gladiator. Yes, really. Female gladiators existed. They were called gladiatrices, and while rare, they were very much a part of Rome's blood-soaked tapestry. Not many people talk about them, which is probably why the idea seems so surprising. You'd think the Colosseum was an all-boys club, but every now and then, a woman took up a sword and stepped into the arena like any other fighter, albeit under more scrutiny, more curiosity, and far more raised eyebrows. You edge closer, not wanting to be too obvious. She's practicing footwork now, light on her feet, her ponytail bobbing behind a bronze helmet. Her arms are lean but strong, and her stance has the confidence of someone who's done this before. She's not new. She's just new here. Someone whispers, "She fought in Capua last season. Won 3 matches. 1 draw." You glance at the speaker. He's not mocking her. He's impressed. Historians still debate just how common female gladiators were. They certainly weren't a majority. But records, inscriptions, and even a few statues confirm they existed. Some were slaves or prisoners, just like their male counterparts. Others were freeborn women, often from the lower classes, who joined the arena for reasons as varied as desperation, defiance, or desire for fame. One inscription found in Pompeii reads, "The women fought bravely and were given the honors of the crowd." Another artifact, a marble relief from Halicarnassus, shows 2 female gladiators named Amazon and Achillea fighting without helmets. The caption reads, "They were granted missio." In other words, both survived. So yes, they were real, and occasionally they were celebrated. But let's not pretend the Romans were progressive icons. Female fighters were seen as novelties, entertainment within entertainment. They were often relegated to the opening acts or used to spice up a festival when the usual blood and sand wasn't drawing enough of a crowd. Emperor Domitian was especially fond of using them in moonlit matches, women, dwarves, and exotic beasts fighting under torchlight, all for the amusement of his private parties. Still, for the women themselves, this was serious work, just as dangerous, just as demanding. They trained, they bled. They risked their lives for the roar of the crowd. Some even wore full armor, indistinguishable from the men, until they removed their helmets. Others were deliberately outfitted in minimal gear, less for strategy and more for spectacle. Rome had a frustrating way of turning everything into a show. You watch her complete a sparring round with one of the younger Murmillos. It's fast-paced, elegant. She's quick, slipping around his shield and tapping the flat of her blade against his side before he can react. The crowd lets out a low, "Ooh," half admiration, half surprise. Someone behind you mutters, "I wouldn't want to face her." And just like that, she's earned something rare respect. In the eyes of the Roman elite, gladiatrix matches were often scandalous. Some writers of the time considered them degrading to traditional Roman values. A woman was supposed to be modest, domestic, controlled, not waving a sword and yelling in front of a sweaty mob. But those same elites kept showing up to the matches, watching, betting, cheering. Hypocrisy meet hypocrisy. There's a fringe theory that some noble women even fought in secret, disguised, enrolled under aliases. There's no hard proof, but let's be honest, it wouldn't be the weirdest thing to happen in Rome. And then there were the accusations. Some historians claim these matches were just sexual spectacle, titillation, dressed up as sport. Others argue that's only part of the story. After all, the audience was full of men who viewed everything through a very narrow, very dramatic lens. But the women in the arena, they weren't props. They were fighters, gladiators. They trained, they suffered, and they made their mark. You remember hearing about a woman called Mevia. She wasn't just a gladiator. She hunted animals in the arena, a rare and brutal assignment. Ancient writers mocked her, called her names. But she kept going. A woman with a spear facing wild beasts in front of thousands. That's more courage than most senators ever showed. Back in the courtyard, the match ends. The woman, her name you later learn is Satria, removes her helmet and ties her hair back again. Her expression is calm, unreadable. She knows the stares are half curiosity, half doubt. She also knows she just proved herself. She turns, makes eye contact with a few of you, and gives the smallest nod. Later, during lunch, the conversations swirl around her performance. She moves like a secutor, someone says. No faster, like a Thraex. Did you see that parry? I'd have dropped my sword. And beneath the jokes and bravado, there's admiration. Quiet, but real. Satria eats with the others, drinks from the same battered cup, listens, smiles, nods. She doesn't boast. She doesn't need to. And you're watching, learning. Because you know that in this world reputation matters more than background. Whether you're a prisoner from Gaul, a runaway from Greece, or a woman from nowhere with a sword, if you fight well, they'll remember you. Eventually, you head back to your bunk. The oil lamps burn low. The air is warm and quiet. Satria's match will be soon, maybe tomorrow. You wonder if the crowd will cheer her name, if they'll forget she's a novelty, and see her for what she really is, a warrior. Someone who stepped into the ring, despite everything the world told her not to. And maybe, just maybe, you'll cheer the loudest. The air is already thick with anticipation when you arrive at the Colosseum. It hums like a giant beast waiting to yawn, stretch, and swallow its audience whole. The crowd has begun to gather, early vendors barking out prices for olives, honey cakes, and watered wine. Children weaving between sandals. Old men settling into their favorite seats with the solemn air of seasoned critics. You can smell sweat perfume, fried fish, and fear, and that's just the front row. Today's games are special. Not because of the fighters, not because of the theme, but because of who's in the crowd. The patronus of the games today is none other than a senator with a reputation for extravagance and a taste for bloodletting on a theatrical scale. The kind of man who throws in a lion just for dramatic tension. He's seated under a silk awning flanked by advisors, bodyguards, and at least one woman in too many bracelets. He smiles as if the world is his personal board game, and around him, Rome. The audience in a Roman amphitheater was a microcosm of the empire. Rich, poor, powerful, desperate. All jammed together in a kind of social pie chart, separated only by seating tiers and the occasional perfume cloud. The closer to the arena floor, the higher your status. Senators got front-row views of the carnage. Plebs sat up top, squinting and swearing about the sun in their eyes. But don't be fooled. Everyone had a say in what happened. The crowd could make or break a fighter with their cheers, chants, and very vocal opinions. Gladiator careers rose and fell on the strength of those cheers. Even emperors with all their power occasionally bowed to the will of a roaring public, and they roared for all kinds of reasons. Some cheered for the artistry, a particularly graceful dodge, a dramatic fall, a clean strike. Others cheered for the gore. You could always tell who those folks were. They'd lean forward, eyes wide mouths, open popcorn-style lentils forgotten in their laps. Then there were the gamblers. Oh, the gamblers. Men and women, clutching wax tablets marking down odds, pacing in the aisles, screaming when their favorite landed a blow. The betting scene at the games was chaotic, colorful, and occasionally criminal. You once saw a guy try to bribe a referee with a roasted chicken wrapped in coins. It did not go well. But perhaps the most fascinating group, the superfans. Yes, Rome had superfans. The ones who painted your name on their walls, wore amulets with your likeness, or composed terribly poetic verses in your honor. Some even wore gladiator-themed jewelry rings shaped like helmets, necklaces with tiny swords. You've seen it. You've even been offered a necklace once, though it smelled strongly of garlic and desperation. You remember a woman named Livia, who used to stand near the arena gates. She never missed a match, always wore a bright blue scarf, and shouted the names of her favorites like a street preacher with a very specific gospel. She once claimed a gladiator winked at her mid-fight. He probably just had dust in his eye. But still, she told that story until people started finishing it for her. There's also the matter of groupies. Yes, those existed too. Famous gladiators were objects of lust and admiration. Some were even pursued romantically by elite Roman women. There's a notorious case of one noblewoman who ran away with her favorite gladiator, leaving her husband, her children, and her impressive art collection behind. It was a scandal. Naturally, the gladiator didn't survive long after that, but the gossip did. The crowd didn't just influence the matches, they directed the energy of the entire event. Their shouts could override a referee's call. Their chants could sway an editor's decision. Their silence could be fatal. You've heard it yourself, those slow-building chants, vive, vive, when the crowd wanted mercy. Iugula, iugula, when they wanted blood. It's not always about the better fighter, it's about the better story. If the underdog fights bravely, if the villain finally gets what's coming, if the show delivers, the crowd is happy. If it doesn't, well, there are always other games, other fighters, other names to chant. And sometimes they chant yours. You felt it once. A murmur at first, then louder. A rising wave of your name echoing through stone. It's the kind of sound that digs into your bones, fills your chest, and makes you forget how much your shoulder hurts. For a moment, you're more than a man. You're a legend, a myth, a walking, sweating miracle of sand and steel. You don't forget that sound. You carry it with you, through bruises, through sleepless nights, through all the matches where the crowd couldn't care less whether you live or die, because today might be different. Today, they might remember. Back in the present, the drums begin. The announcer steps forward, his voice booming over the arena like thunder in a wine shop. Names are shouted. Matches are listed. Bets are taken. The crowd rises and falls with every word. You stand behind the gate, helmet under your arm, heart thudding like a distant war drum. Today, you're facing a seasoned secutor, not one of your favorites. He fights heavy and hard, the kind of man who aims for joints. But you've trained for this. You've studied the rhythm. You know how to slip the net past his shield, how to jab between the cracks. You even practiced a little bow, just in case the crowd's in a dramatic mood. The gate creaks open. You step into the sun. The roar hits you like a wave. And just for a moment, you think you hear it again. Your name, whispered, shouted, remembered. Because in Rome, your life isn't measured in years. It's measured in cheers. You limp back through the arched gate trident, dragging behind you in a lazy trail of dust. Your body is soaked with sweat, your wrist throbs from blocking a particularly aggressive strike, and your net torn again. But you're alive. And more importantly, you won. The crowd's cheers still echo in your ears, even as they move on to the next match. You heard them, your name rising above the hum like a breeze finding its way through a storm. And now, as you lean against the wall to catch your breath, one thought keeps floating to the surface. This could be the beginning of something. Not just survival, not just another match behind you, but something bigger. You're starting to matter. You're not alone in that journey. The stories drift through the ludus like ghost whispers. Fighters who climbed from obscurity to become legends. Men who began as slaves, criminals nobodies, and ended up rich, famous, even free. Take Flamma, for example. A Syrian gladiator fought over 30 times. Awarded the Rudis the wooden sword of freedom. Not once, but 4 times. Each time he refused it. He chose to keep fighting. Maybe for the glory. Maybe because it was all he knew. Or maybe he just liked the roar of the crowd more than the silence of retirement. Then there's Spiculus, the favorite of Emperor Nero. He won. His freedom was gifted. Land wealth servants. The Roman dream, basically. He didn't just walk out of the arena. He ascended from it. Rome loved a good blood and sweat success story, especially if it involved dramatic reversals of fortune and the occasional overly detailed mural. The path to that kind of stardom wasn't easy, though. You had to fight well, but not just that you had to fight smart. You had to learn which styles excited the crowd, how to read your opponent, when to go for a clean strike, and when to throw in a little drama. You had to become unforgettable. You once heard a trainer say, "No one remembers the guy who wins without style." And it's true. A fast, boring win might get you a nod from the lanista, but a narrow victory full of twists and gasps that gets your name painted across a tavern wall with a heart beside it. It's more than winning. It's building a reputation. In some ways, gladiators were like brands, and Rome was the market. You had to sell your image, bold, brutal, noble, reckless, whatever worked. Some leaned into the hero role, always sparing opponents, bowing to the editor, saluting the crowd. Others played the villain, sneering at mercy, refusing to back down, snarling like wolves. Both could succeed. What mattered was being memorable, and if you played your cards right, the perks followed. More than just cheers. Money. Real money. Famous gladiators were sometimes allowed to keep a portion of the winnings. Some earned side income from wealthy patrons' fans and betting cuts. There are even stories, hard to verify, but oh so believable, of gladiators charging appearance fees at private parties. Show up, tell war stories, maybe spar a bit in the courtyard, while nobles sipped wine and tried not to spill on their tunics. One popular fighter, Decimus, allegedly had a bronze bust made of his face while he was still alive. Vanity. Absolutely. But also good PR. And then there's the rarest, shiniest prize of all, freedom. It wasn't guaranteed, of course, not even close, but it was possible. If you won enough matches, gained enough fans, and made the right impression on the right people, you could be awarded the rudies. That little wooden sword meant your contract was over. You were no longer property. You could walk away. The ceremony was brief but electric. The editor, or sometimes even the emperor, would rise and hold out the rudies. The crowd would roar. The other gladiators would salute. You'd take it with shaking hands torn between relief and disbelief. You could finally leave. But then the question came, what next? Some newly freed gladiators became trainers. Others opened taverns, lived quietly in the countryside, or tried their hand at acting in local theater. A few wrote memoirs, or at least paid scribes to write them. One even joined the army, though why someone would trade one kind of battle for another is anyone's guess. And some came back. They didn't have to, but they did. Drawn by the attention, the adrenaline, the rhythm of the crowd, the arena had a strange gravity. You stepped into it as a nobody, but if you survived, if you won, you became something greater. You were seen. Historians still argue about whether this stardom was sustainable. Did gladiators truly retire in peace? Or did most just vanish back into poverty and memory? Some believe the most celebrated ones were exceptions. Others argue their fame granted them real lasting power, if not in politics, then in legacy. You glance down at your hand, still coated in dust. Maybe one day it'll hold that little wooden sword. You imagine the weight of it, lighter than your trident, heavier than air. It represents something real, an end to the blood, or at least the obligation to shed it. But right now, you're still in the game, still rising. You've started to catch the eyes of fans. One of the stable boys handed you a note yesterday, just a scrap of parchment with your name scrawled on it, and a crude drawing of a net. Sweet. A little weird, but sweet. During meals, some of the newer fighters look to you, watching how you move, how you speak. They ask questions. Not openly, but you catch the glances. You remember being them, unsure, hungry, bruised from drills, and terrified of your first match. You wonder what you would say if you could go back and speak to that version of yourself. Probably this survival's not the end goal. Being remembered is. And now, you're on that path. The hard one. The long one. But it's real. With each match, each cheer, each scrape of your name into the arena's walls, you get closer. You sling the trident over your shoulder, nod to the guards at the door, and step back toward the barracks. You still have bruises. You still limp slightly. You'll still get the worst bunk if you don't hurry. But tonight, you also have something else. A whisper of fame. A taste of legend. And the growing possibility that when the crowd calls for a hero, they might just mean you. You don't even remember exactly how it happened. 1 second, you were warming up with your usual partner. The next, you were on the ground, clutching your side, trying to breathe through the kind of pain that makes you see double. It wasn't even during a real match, just training. A routine drill gone sideways. His elbow clipped your ribs at just the wrong angle, and now every inhale feels like you're trying to sip fire through a cracked straw. Not glamorous, not heroic, just stupid. And that's the thing most people forget about Gladiators. It wasn't always the arena that got you. Sometimes it was a rolled ankle during footwork practice. Sometimes it was a splintered wooden sword to the eye. Sometimes it was a bit of bad meat at dinner that took down 4 fighters in one night, leaving everyone else whispering about poisoned figs and angry gods. The games themselves were brutal, but the in-between moments, that's where the real danger crept in. Injuries in training were common. How could they not be? You spent every day swinging, falling, jumping, blocking, getting slammed into the sand by someone just as desperate to prove himself as you. No crowd, no glory. Just sweat, grit, and the occasional snapped collarbone. And when someone went down during training, it wasn't always treated like a tragedy, more like a nuisance. Wrap it, ice it, get back in there. Unless you were valuable. Unless your name meant something. Then they might give you a few days off. Maybe even a medicus with some leftover wine and a bandage that didn't already smell like mildew. But if you were new, just another body with a sword, you learned to fight hurt. Or you learned to quit breathing. You remember another guy, Felix. Big, good-natured, stronger than a mule. Took a gladius to the thigh during a rehearsal match. Not deep, just a gash. But it got infected. No one noticed until the fever hit. He was gone by the end of the week. His bunkmate took his sandals. No ceremony. No send-off. Just another opening on the training roster. And then there's friendly fire. It sounds almost laughable, until you're the one getting whacked in the ear by a distracted secutor who forgot which direction he was supposed to turn. One time, 2 retiarii got tangled in each other's nets during a warm-up, and both ended up with sprained ankles. That match got postponed, and the rest of the barracks didn't let them live it down for a month. You once saw a man slip during a ceremonial salute, fall backwards, and dislocate his shoulder before he even touched his opponent. The crowd thought it was part of the act. They cheered. He cried. Historians love talking about epic last stands in the Colosseum. They write about duels that shook the foundations of the empire, fighters who met their ends in slow motion under the watchful eye of emperors. What they don't write about, the dumb deaths, the tragic, utterly ordinary ones, like the guy who tripped on his own sword, or the one who cut his foot stepping on a broken amphora, or the poor soul who choked on a date pit just before his name was called. And yet, those quiet ends are part of the story, maybe the most honest part. Because being a gladiator wasn't just about the thrill, it was about the constant gnawing awareness that anything could end you. Not just a skilled opponent, not even an unlucky match, but a single misstep. You feel that now sitting on the edge of your bunk, one hand pressing against your aching ribs. You're lucky, probably. It's just a bruise. No blood, no break. But it hurts. Every time you laugh, every time you breathe too hard, every time someone slaps you on the back and says, "Good match yesterday." You wonder sometimes how many others are walking around with hidden injuries, cracked knuckles, twisted knees, blackened toes. You can't always tell. Some men wear pain like armor. Others let it leak out in the way they limp at night or sit too slowly. Everyone hides something. There's not much of a medical system here. A couple of tired healers, some herbs, a jug of cheap wine. Occasionally a doctor gets brought in if the lanista decides you're worth it. But more often, you fix each other. You learn how to wrap a wrist, how to check for broken ribs, how to recognize the signs of fever, and you learn to ignore what you can. Because the arena doesn't wait for bruises to heal. The more seasoned fighters, the ones who've survived more than a few seasons, they walk like old warriors. Bow-legged, stiff-backed. Their joints snap when they stand, and their scars form a kind of map across their skin. They know how to breathe around pain, how to fight one-handed, how to fake a strong stance when your knee is barely holding. They've had enough friendly fire to fill a scroll, but they're still here, and that's something. You take a slow breath, wince, and lean back against the stone wall behind your bunk. Outside, someone's laughing too loudly. Probably that guy who never loses at dice. Somewhere down the hall, you hear the clatter of practice swords. Even on rest days, someone's always training. You should rest, you know that. But your body doesn't want to. It's caught in the rhythm of the ludus, the heartbeat of survival. You think about how many of your injuries haven't even come from matches. Training accidents, slippery floors, a particularly aggressive game of bone dice. Even sleep can betray you. One fighter wrenched his neck so badly rolling over in his bunk he couldn't lift his shield the next day. No applause for that. No crowd. No mercy. Historians still argue whether gladiators were treated as athletes or animals. Some point to the structured training, the baths, the special diets. Others point to how easily you're replaced, like horses or dogs or chess pieces. If you break, you get patched. If you can't be patched, you get buried. But here's the truth. Bruised and bandaged, though it may be, you get up anyway. Even when your body screams. Even when your bruises bloom in the dark like angry flowers. You train, you fight, you survive. Because you have no other choice. And, strangely, because there's still a part of you that believes in something beyond survival. Something like legacy or pride or hope. Or you shift carefully on the bunk, pull your blanket over your chest, and try to ignore the throbbing in your ribs. Tomorrow's another day. And pain is just part of the costume. The days blur together. Training, eating, tending bruises, repeating movements until they become instinct, until your hands do what your mind forgets to command. It's a rhythm, not comforting exactly, but familiar. Then, like thunder from a clear sky, a rumor begins to echo through the ludus, not shouted, just passed from ear to ear in the way that serious things always are. A philosopher is coming to the games. You raise an eyebrow at the news. A philosopher, here, apparently, one of the more popular Roman thinkers, has been invited by a high-ranking patron to attend the next spectacle. He's been writing against the games, calling them senseless, cruel, a mockery of reason. And now, someone thinks it would be funny, or maybe persuasive, to bring him right to the heart of it. to show him the blood up close. You've heard of these types: Stoics, Epicureans, all those toga-clad minds who claim wisdom lies in detachment. They preach restraint, temperance, dignity. The arena, of course, is the exact opposite of that. It's sweat and sand and noise and chaos. There's no dignity in gasping for air with a cracked rib, while strangers argue about whether you should be spared. Or maybe there is. Depends who you ask. Some gladiators scoff at the idea. He'll sit in his ivory box and flinch every time someone swings a sword. Others are more curious. What if he sees us, really sees us, not just as victims, but as men? And then there are those who just shrug. He won't change anything. Because here's the quiet truth: beneath the cheering and the speeches and the glittering gold of the emperor's box, not everyone liked the games. Even in Rome's golden age, there were voices of dissent. Seneca, one of the more famous Stoics, once wrote about going to the arena and being horrified not by the fights between trained gladiators, but by the cruel, mindless executions between matches. He said the violence made people worse, not better, that it dulled the soul. Others echoed the sentiment. They argued the games turned humans into beasts and audiences into monsters, that cheering for blood was no different than committing it. Of course, those voices were small, and often drowned out by louder ones, by emperors trying to win popularity, by merchants making coin from betting, by citizens who saw the games as a sacred part of Roman life. But still they existed, protesting in scrolls, in speeches, in back corners of libraries. You wonder what it must be like to be someone like that, so committed to an ideal that you'd stand up against a tidal wave of tradition, to walk into an arena and say no more. Brave, arrogant. Maybe both. But you can't help thinking, if someone like him saw you fight, would he only see a victim? Or would he see a person making the most of the worst cards? Because here's the thing. The philosophers don't always understand you didn't ask for this life. But now that you have it, you want to own it. Control what little you can. Make it matter. The arena may be brutal, but it's also honest in a way that politics and philosophy rarely are. You earn every cheer, every scar, every moment of mercy. You don't hide behind words. You wear your truths on your skin. Still, you're curious. When the day comes, you scan the seats from the staging area. There he is, robes too white expression, too calm, sitting among Rome's restless elite, like a swan in a barrel of eels. He watches, quietly. No clapping, no cheering, just eyes that follow every move. You wonder what he's thinking. You wonder if he's judging you. The match is brief. Two young fighters, both nervous. One takes a lucky shot early, and the other goes down fast. No death, just a groan and a roll in the sand. The crowd barely reacts. The philosopher doesn't blink. Later, you pass by a cluster of senators talking loudly near the gate. I asked him what he thought one says, gesturing toward the philosopher. Do you know what he said? I think Rome is a mirror, and right now it's cracked. You don't know exactly what that means, but it stays with you. Back in the barracks, someone's scratching a design into a plank near their bed. It's crude, a figure with arms raised, surrounded by faceless shapes. Maybe a fighter, maybe a crowd, maybe both. Others debate what would happen if the games ended. Rome would fall. Someone says dramatically, waving a spoon, no, it wouldn't. Another argues, they'd just find new ways to be awful. They'd replace us with chariot races. A third mutters, fewer swords, more wheels. Historians still argue about the impact of those early critics of the games. Did their words make a difference? Did they plant seeds that eventually grew into reform? Or did they simply give a few Romans pause before placing bets? Some say it was Christianity, with its emphasis on mercy and the value of human life that eventually led to the game's decline. Others say it was economics too expensive to run too hard to justify. Still others point to changing tastes. Entertainment evolves. What thrilled one generation bored the next. But the truth is probably a blend, a slow shift. Whispers that grew into debates into laws. And maybe, just maybe, someone in that philosopher's audience listened, saw the blood, the faces, the cost. Maybe someone went home and asked a new question. Maybe they asked, do we need this? For now, though the sand is still warm, the blades still sharp, and the crowd still cheers, you sit with your back against the cool wall of the ludus, eyes half closed, listening to the world outside, laughter, arguments, footsteps. You're not a philosopher. You don't have a scroll or a podium, but you have a voice, and every time you fight, you say something, not with words, but with everything else. The arena feels quieter than usual today, though you know that can't be true. The crowd is still filling the seats, still shouting for vendors, still jostling over bets and arguing about whether the guy in the last match slipped or dove on purpose. The sunlight still paints the sand in gold and shadow, and the drums still beat in that same steady ceremonial rhythm. But something's different. Maybe it's the mood, a kind of restlessness in the air, a shift, subtle but present. You're not the only one who feels it. Others are whispering trainers walking with just a bit more haste. You overheard one guard say, "Only a few more games left this season." Another replied, "Maybe the last we'll ever see." You don't say anything, but the thought stays with you. Whispers of change have been growing louder, not just from philosophers or senators, but from people in the street. Too expensive, they say. Too savage. Not what Rome needs anymore. Some say it's the new emperors. Others blame religion. The Christians especially speak out against the games. Mercy over murder, they say. Dignity over spectacle. The empire's shifting. You can feel it in your bones, old stone foundations beginning to creak. The Colosseum, once the very heartbeat of Rome, no longer throbs with the same raw certainty. You tighten the straps on your greaves, buckle your belt. Your armor is worn but solid, familiar. You know, every scuff on your shield, every chip on your blade. These things have kept you alive. They've given you purpose, identity, even a kind of love. And now they might be nearing their final use. It's not just you. Gladiators across the empire are hearing the same rumors. Fewer matches, less funding. Fewer citizens willing to support the games with their taxes. The schools are quieter, some even shuttered. No more young trainees shouting in the mornings. Just veterans with too many scars and fewer matches on the calendar. Historians will later debate what truly ended the gladiatorial games. Was it Emperor Constantine banning them in a symbolic gesture of new morality? Was it the rising cost of training, feeding, and housing fighters who, let's face it, kept inconveniently surviving? Or was it the culture itself, growing tired, soft, or maybe just bored of blood? Whatever the reason, the tide is turning. The last recorded gladiator match in Rome took place in the early 400s. After centuries of cheers, death, redemption, and sand, the games simply stopped. Not with a final bloody battle, not with one grand champion waving to the crowd. They faded, quietly. One day there were matches, the next there weren't. You wonder how it must have felt to be one of the last, the final fighters. The ones who looked up into the crowd and sensed not admiration, but disapproval. Not thrill, but guilt, maybe pity. Did they still fight like it mattered? Did they know they were the end of an era? You glance around the arena and see the familiar faces. Old rivals, sparring partners, brothers in arms. Some of them you fought, others you feared. One or two you loved in your own quiet way. There's a bond in this life that no philosopher can quite describe. A shared understanding that comes from staring at death, shaking its hand and walking away. Not always victorious, but breathing. And now, perhaps free. Because if the games end, what happens to you? For some, it's terrifying. What is a gladiator without an arena? A lion without teeth? But for others, maybe you included it's something close to peace. A release from the endless cycle of wounds and weapons. A life beyond the walls of the ludus. Freedom used to be a gift earned through blood and sweat. Now, it might simply arrive. Not granted by a wooden sword, but by silence. By empty seats. By a culture that has moved on. You hear a bell ring the signal to form ranks for what might be the last time. You pick up your gear, moving slowly. Not from pain, but from something else. Reflection, perhaps. Reverence. You step out into the corridor where light spills across the floor in long golden lines. The dust catches in the air, dancing like tiny spirits. You pass by the shrine nemesis again. Someone has left a fresh offering, a coin, a scrap of purple cloth, and a small wooden figurine. You pause, touch the stone lightly, and whisper the same thing you always do. Let them see me. Then you step onto the sand. The crowd is still there, still watching, still hungry, but not quite as loud. You salute, and the fight begins. It's clean, intense, honest. You land a few hits, take a few, lose your footing, once recover. The crowd leans forward. They're with you, but not all the way. You can feel it. Their minds are half here, half already gone, thinking of other things. The empire, the future, their children. It ends with a draw. You're not disappointed. You bow, you breathe. And for once, no one calls for blood. You walk back through the gate and the world feels heavier, quieter, but also lighter. Because maybe this is what legacy really means. Not the roar of the crowd, not the trophies, but the fact that you stood here, that you fought, that someone, somewhere, will remember. Maybe a name carved into stone, maybe a painting on a wall, maybe just a whispered story told on a quiet night, but remembered all the same. So now you let the world fall into stillness. The crowd has gone home. The sand has settled. The armor finally can be unbuckled and set down. The weight of it all, of expectation, of fear, of glory, softens around your shoulders, no longer pressing but gently resting like a familiar blanket at the end of a long day. The torches flicker low. The murmurs of the city fade into night's gentle hush. Somewhere in the distance, a fountain trickles. You can almost hear the rustle of olive trees, the creak of wooden doors closing, the soft footsteps of servants, extinguishing lamps one by one. And in the quiet, you're still. You're safe. No more opponents. No more games. Just breath. Steady, deep, and calm. You close your eyes and let your muscles release. Let your mind drift, not to battles, but to warmth, to quiet mornings, to laughter shared over stew and bread, to the soft hum of existence without the echo of cheers or the sting of sand against skin. You made it through, and that matters. You may never wear a laurel crown. You may never see your name etched in marble. But you stood your ground. You lived fiercely, and you were seen. So rest now, champion. Let the torches burn out. Let the arena fade into the fog of memory. Sleep deep. Sleep soft. And when you dream, dream not of battles, but of peace.